Hey, it's Illuminostic. Today we're going to make a video about ayahuasca and telepathy. I'm surprised actually at the, I don't know that I've really seen anyone out there in any of the groups, Facebook groups or whatnot, talking about this, and it's actually a really common experience, and we actually know why to some extent this happens. So, I think it's a very important aspect of the ayahuasca experience, because it shows us that we are all truly one mind, and that the perception that we have on a day-to-day basis of our singular consciousness is actually just illusory. And of course, this is important for a number of reasons. When we're talking about put it in the context of the spiritual revolution. So do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell notification. Haven't made a video for about a week. I've been really sick. I'm still really sick. So I'm going to keep this kind of brief today. We're just going to dive right in. So, some of you might know this, but back in the day, early 60s-ish, I think, ayahuasca, the active constituents in the vine, the harmala alkaloids, were actually called or referred to as telepamine by the early researchers, because it had a long history going back throughout the anthropological record. And also just people relaying their experiences. There tended to be a lot of references to experiences with telepathy. Of course, the skeptic would say, "Well, you're really, really high, so you're thinking you're telepathic." But we'll get to why we know better than that in just a moment. So the anthropological record that I had referred to goes back quite some time. One of the earliest and most famous instances of ayahuasca and telepathy, or just some sort of psychic phenomena. In this case, I don't know that it would be the telepathy exactly, but Sir Walter Raleigh, the famous explorer, was in South America, and he was talking to a shaman who had said, "When I drink the vine, I can know anything." And Sir Walter Raleigh said, "Well, then tell me something you couldn't possibly know." To which the shaman replied, "Well, your sister's dead." And of course, it turned out that his sister had died a couple days previous. And so, that's one of the earliest instances. I believe it's in his diary. Probably, I think, from the 1700s, thereabouts, perhaps even a little earlier. I can't really remember when that guy was running around causing problems. So, and then over the years, more recent history in the early 1900s, through the 1960s, anthropologists would occasionally report that they had seen a shaman that could describe the Eiffel Tower, or a street corner in China, with astonishing attention to detail. And it was absolutely there was no way that they were just fabricating this stuff. They'd never left the jungle. It couldn't be a trick. So it raised some eyebrows, and it got the as I said, the harmala alkaloids the nickname of telepamine. So in 1966, it could have been 1963, I'm not sure if they published a book in 66 and did the experiments earlier. It must have started at least in 63. I'm sure it took a few years to get this many experiments done. But there's a book, and I would highly advise anyone that's interested in psychedelics of all kinds to check this book out if you can get your hands on it. It's called Varieties of Psychedelic Experience by Doctors Masters in Houston. And it was done before all of the psychedelics were banned, which didn't happen in the United States until '66. But they were shut down in the middle of their research, and pretty unhappy about that. But they were aware of these alleged telepathic capacities of ayahuasca. So they devised experiments where they would have someone on the bottom floor of a 10-story building that had drank the vine, or vice versa, the guy up real high, but separated by several floors, and they had pictures that were very, very abstract and random. So a guy skiing down a hill that's on fire, and there's a UFO and a lion or something, So they did that to try to reduce the possibility that there was just guessing going on. And so they reported 99% accuracy with this, or something to that effect. Basically, it was pretty much conclusive that the vine did in fact induce telepathy in people that drank it. Earlier I alluded to, how we may know what actually causes this and the mechanism behind it. There are some, neurobiologists who think that psychedelics actually just bring down filters that screen out, you know, for example, other people's thoughts and energies and stuff in the universe. I know I mentioned this a lot, but, you know, it's that concept again, that there's something in the vine that actually, you know, just kills the filter switch on telepathy. So how it is that we don't just become overwhelmed with, you know, everyone's thoughts in the circles, it seems to be selective. That's a whole nother story, and I do think that, you know, aside from there being a chemical constituent to how these things play out, there's also a spiritual, you know, there is an intelligence, I feel, that guides nature through its evolution, that guides us in our everyday life, and that, you know, has some influence over, you know, what people experience during an ayahuasca ceremony. I think that also, you know, from my subjective experience, ayahuasca in general, you know, we know that DMT is secreted by the pineal gland, which, you know, is right where the third eye was alleged to be for thousands of years. So there's a pretty good chance that that's the reference that they were making. It does have rods and cones, just like an actual eye. And I'll relate some of my own experiences with telepathy and ayahuasca. You know, of course, I had done the research, and I was kind of aware of that this was a phenomenon associated with ayahuasca. So one night I drank the vine, and I was laying on the porch, and suddenly I felt like I could see through my forehead. And, you know, I'm aware that the brain is a pretty sophisticated piece of machinery, and I thought, well, you know, it's entirely possible that my imagination is reconstructing. You know, this was on the downside of an ayahuasca journey. I wasn't really, you know, very altered anymore. But, you know, I waved my hand around in front of my forehead, and I looked at the railing, and a mosquito landed and bit me. I could see him the whole time and all the detail, you know. And I thought, you know, this really doesn't seem like my imagination is putting this together. It looked very real. It kind of looked like what infrared. So it was very strange, and so I went to bed. I woke up the next day, I went downstairs, and the first thing the shaman says to me is, by the way, sometimes you can see through your forehead when you drink the medicine. Now, I guess it could be just a random coincidence that he felt compelled to just mention this one detail. But to me, that's a good example of, you know, the telepathy that takes place, but also that I think there's something, you know, an intelligence, a higher mind behind it all, that, you know, kind of compels people to communicate certain things that, you know, the person that's speaking may not have really a total grasp on the significance of what they're communicating, but they're being compelled to do so, you know, by this connection to this collective mind. They're just trying to communicate something to all of us. So that's one example. There's another example from the same group. I mean, this guy does this all the time. You know, I think he spends so much time in the ayahuasca state that he's like an antenna. You know, so he's just always picking things up. But I had come down here and fallen in love with a German girl. That's how I referred to her in the group at the time. And I was really looking for guidance because she was a lot younger, and I didn't really know how I felt about it ethically. I mean, you know, she was totally well, you know, of age or whatever, but still, it just, you know, it's 14 years or something, and I just, you know, and I really cared deeply about her, kind of instinctively, and so I was kind of struggling with, you know, whether to just keep it platonic or, you know, what to do. And so the medicine was offering me a lot of guidance, and also the shaman. You know, at one point I remember I was sitting on the desk, and the deck, and I was kind of thinking about what to do, and I thought, well, you know, I should invite her to dinner or something that's not so, you know, just casual, or to tea rather than, or maybe just to sit by the river. I don't remember what it was, but whatever it was, you know, I was thinking this, and I opened my eyes, and the shaman's sitting next to me, and he says, the German girl, invite her to tea by the river, which of course I did, and it didn't happen. We ended up, I don't know, we walked to a waterfall or something. The point being, though, he knew exactly what I was thinking about and responded very succinctly. And, you know, this happens with this individual, like I said, constantly. Also, you know, I have had experiences of telepathy outside of the realm of ayahuasca and entheogens in general. the first, probably most dramatic experience that I ever had of telepathy actually involved like a very small amount of psilocybin mushrooms, but I think enough to bring that filter down. And I think in my last video I went into some detail about this story, so I won't really go over it again, but basically this girl a mile away, you know, she knew probably, I don't know, probably an hour and a half, 2 hours, every single thought that went through my head, exactly what I was doing, in astonishing detail. And I mean, we're talking about very specific. When she came up to me and started relaying the stuff, it was the thoughts that she heard were word for word. Yeah, it was really quite astonishing. And also, believe it or not, there are guys, homeless guys in Santa Cruz. Their hustle is actually reading minds. And I experienced this on the streets of Santa Cruz, and you know, I thought I must have lost my mind or whatever. And I walked into the gas station. For some reason, I mentioned to the girl behind the register that this had happened, and she said, "Oh yeah, it's a hustle. These guys, you know, they every now and then they'll do it to some like wealthy, you know, new agey kind of couple, and they'll end up being taken care of for 6 months or whatever, and the people will think they're the guru or whatever." And she's like, "Not all of them are accurate, but some of them are astonishingly so." And so I realized that this was like common knowledge in this town in California, that there were these street people. It's like somebody figured it out, taught the rest of them. And eventually I ended up spending some time with these guys and kind of talking to them about it, and they told me their process, and it's kind of an astonishing thing. So to wrap this up here, you know, kind of the point of this is I think that one of the most valuable things that ayahuasca teaches us, one of the most valuable lessons that we get from experiences of telepathy, is that we just know that we're one connected organism. And I think that that knowledge, you know, it's very different to hear something like we're all one, we're all connected, and it's just sort of this like abstract metaphysical idea that sounds good and that people like, and you know, it's kind of trite and cliche. But you know, when you've experienced it directly, when you have you know, direct knowledge, gnosis, you know, of these experiences, I think it's much more valuable. And ayahuasca is able to do this regularly. So, you know, and I would suggest this, like, you know, something that you guys could try in your ceremonies. Maybe bring this up and say, you know, I've heard about the capacity for telepathy, and devise some experiments and, you know, actually demonstrate to yourselves beyond a shadow of a doubt that we're one mind. You know, this is a very valuable thing to learn. And I think that once that door has been pushed open and you are, you know, able to have access to it the first time, it can happen easier and easier, and eventually we will have access to these kind of capacities that without any assistance from ayahuasca or psilocybin or whatever it might be. And of course, you know, in pragmatic terms, in my personal feeling is that the political situation in the world basically right now is pretty scary and intimidating. You know, if we're in survival mode, or if we're trying to be stealthy and engage in some sort of revolutionary activity, having access to telepathy is going to be, you know, hugely empowering. So, you know, I mean, there are many levels. Also, you know, I made reference to the, what do they call it? It's not astral projection, but when you, remote viewing, you know, shamans have done this very convincingly many, many times for anthropologists in the Amazon. I think, you know, when we drink our ayahuasca, trying to develop this and setting it up so that, you know, you have some sort of test to be able to, you know, objectively validate whether you were successful or not afterwards. I think that structuring our experiences with ayahuasca in this way so that we're actually working towards concrete goals is something that I see lacking in a lot of ceremony. And a lot of people, you know, are talking about how, you know, they have these traditional ceremonies, and, you know, and sometimes people will get kind of irritated with me because I will point things out and say, actually, you know, there's nothing traditional about this. And, you know, there's this kind of reaction like, well, why are you being negative? And people take a lot of pride, I think, in being knowledgeable, and they don't really like it when they're showed that, you know, these things that they're calling knowledge are, you know, just not real. And one of those things is that in the indigenous traditions in the past, developing capacities like remote viewing and telepathy were part of the agenda. You didn't just drink ayahuasca and sit around and have visions. You know, there was somebody actually guiding you towards a higher capacity of mind. And so this is something that I think would be very easy to bring into the circles, and that there's a wealth of benefit. So do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe. If you can, support us on Patreon. I mean, this is really important too. You know, if it's not me, let it be someone. But I've noticed that there's a lot of people on the spiritual path out there that feel like, you know, shunning money is what spiritually evolved people have to do. And if we're going to change the world, that is not going to work. It's just not going to work. There are certain parameters that are not dictated by us, they're dictated to us. And one of those still is that, you know, money is power in this world. If you have a voice, you want to project that voice, you know, it's going to take at least a little bit of capital to do this. So, you know, I would just want to encourage you, if you see people out there that you think are doing something worthwhile, don't be afraid to, you know, contribute as much as you can. And do that for us too. You click the link for Patreon. You know, we definitely could use some support. So thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you again in a few days. I think I'm going to make a political video, and it's going to be the only one that I'm ever going to make. And I'll warn you now, I'm not taking either sides. This is just something I've been watching lately, and I have seen the level of indoctrination and the delusion and illusion and all that stuff with people in the United States and other places like Israel, and I'm sure pretty much all over the world. It's just gotten to be really frightening. So I'm going to make one video, and then I'm never going to go back on that subject again. So keep your eyes peeled for that, because who knows, you might learn something. So like button, subscribe, and we'll see you later.